Hello everyone, this is Mr. Mola for lesson 9-2, solving quadratic equations by graphing. So most of this should be review. So we're going to solve by graphing. We're finding the zeros. They just call something a little different here. So first thing we should look to see is if we can undistribute, if we can pull out, find the greatest common factor, whatever words you want to use there. And if we can't, then we're just going to FOIL it out. So if I have x squared minus 4, that's really the same as x plus 2 and x minus 2. So that finds us our zeros then. So that means I know x plus 2 equals 0. So 1, 0 is negative 2. X minus 2 equals 0. 2 minus 2 is 0. So 1, 0 is negative 2. So that means I'm going to put a dot at negative 2 and positive 2. So that gives me at least my intercepts of where this graph is going to go, but it doesn't tell me how far down to go. Okay, so that means I need to find my axis of symmetry. So here's my intercepts. My axis of symmetry, remember, is in the middle of these two. So in the middle between negative 2 and positive 2 is 0. So I know somewhere on that line is going to be my vertex then. So if I plug in 0, 0 squared is 0. 0 minus 4 is negative 4. So that means the bottom of this graph is at 0, negative 4. So that's what my graph is going to look like then. So first we need to FOIL it, find out what our intercepts are going to be. Once we can find out our intercepts, then we can find the axis of symmetry. And then once we know the axis of symmetry, we can find the vertex. So it's pretty much going to be that process over and over again. So here for B, they both have an x in common. It's x squared plus 3x. So first thing I'm going to do is pull out an x. And if I pull out an x from x squared, I'm just left with x. And if I pull out an x from x plus 3, I'm just left with 3. So then kind of the same thing, I need to find out what makes it equal 0. Well, the first part is going to be x equals 0, so that's going to be one part. And then the second part, x plus 3 equals 0. So that means my other 0 is negative 3. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, this one we're going to actually have a decimal here, because in the middle between 0 and negative 3 is our axis of symmetry, and in between 0 and negative 3 is negative 1.5. So now you know your vertex is going to be somewhere in that negative 1.5 line there. And if you plug in negative 1.5 in for your x here, you end up with negative 2.25. It's kind of weird here because now we end up with a fraction. So in between, so 1.5 and then 2.25, probably somewhere around there. So that means our graph is going to look something like that. The only other way that this problem gets harder is you might have problems like letter D. So you might be sitting there racking your brain. I'm sorry, not letter D, letter F. So you might be sitting there racking your brain trying to figure out problems like this. Two numbers that multiply to 6 and add to 3. It's not possible. So you will have some on the homework that are no solution. And you just got to keep trying until you kind of see it. I'll show you what it looks like as a graph. So if you are sitting there trying and saying, hey, what's this going to be? So let's go to Desmos and graph this. So it's negative x squared plus 3x minus 6. Well, the zeros, this one doesn't have any solutions because it's never touching that x line. So this is why this graph is a no solution, because it never touches that x intercept. Okay, but if I look at one of the ones we just did, like if I go back and put in, that first one we did, where it's x squared minus 4, we can see right away, hey, there's our intercepts, negative 2, positive 2. There's our vertex, 0, negative 4. We can see it's touching the x line there. But this one, no solution, because it's not touching the x line. So you might be thinking like, oh, this is possible, but then it's not going to have any intercepts there. So some of them are not going to be possible. So always use Desmos once you're sitting there trying to figure out and you're like, oh, I just can't get this. Well, maybe you're right. Maybe it's not possible. Okay, let's do a couple more on this page. So I have x squared plus 4x. Same thing. They both have an x in common. So I'm going to pull out an x. If I pull out an x from x squared, I'm just left with x. And if I pull out an x from 4x, I'm just left with 4. So that means my intercepts are 0 and negative 4. So there, 1, 2, 3, negative 4. Okay, so there's my 2 points. And then I need to find my axis of symmetry. In between 0 and negative 4 is negative 2. and then I need to find my vertex. So negative 2 squared is 4, and then 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. So 4 plus a negative 8 is a negative 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So your graph will look something like that. Number 2, kind of the same thing, except now for some reason, instead of saying equals 0, they have this negative x squared. So one little step beforehand, add x squared before, or to the other side, so that it equals 0. So x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals 0. So just mixing it up there a little bit. And then this problem is also a little different because when I solve it here, so x minus 1, x minus 1, well, this one's a little weird now because I'm really only going to have one answer because x minus 1 and x minus 1 is 1. 1 minus 1 equals 0, 1 minus 1 equals 0. So this one's only going to really have like one intercept. So it's going to be hard to know that, and that's not really even your intercepts, that's really your axis of symmetry. So when you have a problem like this, where you only get one answer when both those things are the same in the parentheses, what you're going to have to end up doing is picking a number higher than that and a number lower than that. So if I have x squared minus 2x plus 1, I need to pick a number higher than 1 or lower than 1. And that'll tell me how high or low then, or how skinny or how fat my graph is going to be. Because if I plug in like 0 here, well, I can get a point way over here and way over here, and then that makes my graph really low. Or I could get points like way up here, and that makes my point really, or my graph really tall and skinny. So you got to figure out where you're putting those dots. So if I pick a number lower than 1, I'm just going to stick with 0 because that's easy to multiply by. So 0 squared is 0. Negative 2 times 0 is 0. And then plus 1. So 0 minus 0 plus 1 is 1. So I'm going to put a dot right there at 0, 1. And then I'm going to pick a number higher than 1. So higher than 1, again, I'm going to go with the easy way out. I'm going to go with 2. Okay, so 2 squared is 4. Minus 2 times 2 is 4. Plus 1. Well, 4 minus 4 is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. So my graph ends up looking like that. So that'll only happen that you need to do that extra work is when you get the x minus something and x minus something, the same something over and over again. So if you see something like this, you're going to have to do a little bit more work. Number 3, so x squared plus 2x plus 4. This one is going to be a no solution. It is not possible. There's not two numbers that multiply to 4 and add to 2. The only way you can get to multiply to 4 is 4 and 1. Well, 4 plus 1 is 5, not 2, or 2 and 2. And 2 times 2 is, or 2 plus 2 is 4, not 2. So some of these are not going to be possible, and you're just going to have to try those and then graph them to kind of see what it looks like. Otherwise, the rest of these are pretty similar. And then here, it just wants us to find the zeros. I'll kind of show you the short way, which is super easy if you have the graph, and then we'll go through the long way then there. So let's do the long way for number 10. So I'm finding the zeros. So x minus 2 equals 0. So 2 minus 2 equals 0. So 2 is one of my zeros. And then here I have x squared minus x equals 0. So I need to pull out an x from there. If I pull out an x from x squared, I'm just left with x. And if I pull out an x from x, I'm just left with that negative 1. So now I have that x equals 0. And then x minus 1 equals 0. So remember, we're finding the 0, so we set them all equal to 0. So my zeros are 2, 0, and 1. And the way I got those numbers, the easy way, is literally just looking to see where it crosses the x-intercept. So some of these might take you 2 seconds because you're like, oh, I can see it crosses at 0, at 1, or at 2, and then you're done. So this one has 2 answers here. It crosses at negative 2, and that makes sense because negative 2 plus 2 is 0. And it crosses at positive 1. And that'll make sense because if it's x squared minus 2x plus 1, so it says 1 squared is just 1, minus 2 times 1, which is just 2, plus 1. So 1 minus 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 plus 1 is, guess what, 0. And that's what we're finding. We're finding the 0. So if you have the graph for these, this is going to be a lot easier to do because we're really just looking at where it's crossing the x line. Here it's crossing at negative 1, positive 1, and positive 3. Okay, negative 1 is right there. Negative 1 plus 1 is 0. So that's why negative 1 is the answer. This one we have x squared minus 4x plus 3. So that means if I do x minus 3, x minus 1, negative 1 times 3 is 3. So two numbers that multiply to 3 and add to negative 4. Negative 3 plus negative 1 is negative 4. And then you just set those equal to 0. So x minus 3 equals 0. So add 3. Add 3. Well, that's where the 3 answer comes from. Then x minus 1 equals 0. Add 1, and that's where the 1 answer comes from. So either doing it the long way of solving for it, or just doing it the short way of, hey, it crosses the x-intercept here, here, and here. Those are my 3 answers. Negative 3, negative 2, negative 1. Here crosses at 1, 2, 3. There's my 3 answers. Here crosses at negative 1, positive 3. There's my 3 answers. And then same thing here. These I would definitely put into Desmos because it's going to be really hard to say or to figure out what it is, especially to get it in big ideas exactly correct. Like I can assume here it's around a half, maybe a little less than a half, but I don't want to guess, especially with big ideas. It's going to want the exact answer rounded to the nearest tenth. So instead of just guessing, I would just plug it into Desmos. So here it says x squared minus 3x plus 1. And then Desmos will highlight it, and you can see the intercepts are 0.382, but remember it wanted us to round to the nearest tenth. So 0.382 rounded to the nearest tenth is the same as 0.4. And then the other intercept is 2.68 or 618. So that rounded to the nearest tenth is just 2.6. Okay, same thing here. It's probably about negative 1.2, but let's plug it in, see where we're at here. So x squared minus x minus 3. See how right Mr. Muller was? Well, negative 1.3. I was off by a tenth. So negative 1.3. There it looks like it's a little bit more than 2. Let's look at the point there, 2.3. Okay, so when it says here rounds to the nearest tenth, the only way I could see of doing this is just plugging it into Desmos and seeing where they cross. So this one's a negative x squared minus 8x minus 13. So it should be negative 5.732, so that rounds to negative 5.7. This one looks like it's negative 1, negative 2, a little bit more than negative 2. And it's negative 2.26, so 2.6 rounds up to negative 2.3.